Okay, welcome to June gem number 3. This is going to be Nintex Forms basics, and we're going to focus on a little bit of on-prem and a little bit of Office 365 as well. So let's start off with the on-prem environments. There's a 2013 environment, and you'll see at the top of your list, you'll have a button on the ribbon called Nintex Forms. Now, first of all, I just want to point out a couple of things. In SharePoint, you can have multiple content types in your SharePoint lists. So even though this is just a dummy list that just has a title field on it, when I click on Nintex Forms, it automatically is building a form for me for that particular content type, which happens to be item. That's the default one for a custom list in SharePoint. Now, clicking on this over here is the same as clicking on Customize the Item Form. So if you do have multiple content types, when you click on this drop down, you'll actually see multiple values in this drop down for customizing individual content types. Okay, so let's actually click on this and jump into the Form Designer and figure out some of the basics around Nintex Forms. Okay, first of all, you'll see the form that's been automatically built for you. There is already a title field because it has actually looked at the list that we're on and has built a form for us. Now, there's a few things I want to point out that you should see straight away. First of all, the Nintex Forms logo. This is just an image control, and when you click on it, you'll see at the top there is an image URL. Scroll across, you see it's a .png file, so that means you can always change this image to something else. Right? If you didn't want to see the Nintex Forms logo on there and you want your own corporate logo, you can definitely do that. The other thing to notice is the gray background, so just keep note of that. And also you'll notice the label fields, all the text has been right justified, and the data entry controls have some padding around them. Now this is all based on something called a Nintex Forms template, which on-prem is for the entire farm. There's one form template for the entire farm. I'll go into that in another gem later on. But just so you know, this is all based on a particular template. So you could later on build your own template so that when you build any future forms, they automatically inherit from your template rather than the out-of-the-box Nintex Forms one. So have your own corporate logo, background colors, any CSS that does all this right justification and padding, or do whatever you want it to do. Okay, so putting that aside, even though it has built a form for us, you can actually see on the left here is very similar to the Nintex workflow designer. You have your controls on the left and you have your design canvas on the right. So you can very easily add other controls to this form. If you want some more data to be filled in, you can add some other single line of text controls. If you want to capture where something is being filled in and submitted, you can add a geolocation control. So it's simply drag and drop, very easy to do. Now there's a number of controls here. You'll see that you can use geolocation, multiple lines of text, a page view, a repeating section, which is a big one. Might do a session on that a little bit later. Then you got some SQL request, web request. If you want to surface some data from other line of business systems, you can do that as well. There's also a SharePoint category where you have SharePoint specific controls. For example, the list lookup, which is a big one to be used, manage metadata, even a workflow diagram if you want to have a form actually surface the Nintex workflow design or the current instance of the design on that form. So when somebody's, for example, filling in a task, they might be really interested in seeing where they're at in the particular process. This is a way of actually displaying that visualization of the form itself. So pretty handy. You also have this option of list columns. So if you happen to get out of the designer, go back to your list and create a column, or even if you went up to the top here, clicked on Nintex Forms and clicked on the create column button, you will see a new thing appear here, new control that you can simply drag and drop. It'll be automatically connected to that new field. So notice if I click on the title edit box here, it has a connected to property and it's connected to title. If I select one of the ones I've dragged, it says not connected. So really important to note that there are going to be some values that will be stored with the SharePoint list item and others will be stored with the actual form or form XML. Okay, let's see what else we can do with Nintex Forms. Now we've talked about some of the being able to add controls and you can drag them around and do all that sort of stuff. But the other thing you might need to do is actually configure some of the settings for these controls. So you can always double click on these and that will bring up the settings box for that particular control. So you can see a single line text box and you'll have the ability to actually do some configuration, some default values, connecting to a field, default data type, appearance. Do you want this control to be visible or not visible, etc. And some formatting if you want to do some of the drawing stuff, add some CSS classes, etc. And the other couple of important things I'll talk about some more, which is validation. So if you want to do some validation around this particular control, and this is more for the developer-minded people. If you want to do things like storing the client IDs of JavaScript, if you want to add some JavaScript, you can definitely do that. Okay, now the other thing to note is some of the things that you'll see at the top here. I think the big one is preview, right? It's going to save you from having to publish a form, go to your list, try to create a new item just to test out your form. Preview gives you the ability to actually see what the form will look like. So it's very much what you see is what you get type of scenario. Notice there's a few other important buttons here. Reset, if you want to reset the form back to the beginning, you can do that. Delete form. Now this happens when you're working on a particular list, you've built a form and then you decide I need to just delete it and go back to the original SharePoint form. You can just click on that. It's very easy to do. And versions, if you want to go back to a previous version that you built, that's very doable by clicking on this versions button and actually going back to a previous version. I have no versions because this is the first time I'm building this particular form for this list. Very similar to Nintex workflow, we have the import and export buttons, right? So very rarely will you be building things directly in your production environment. I'm finding more and more people build things in a QA or a test environment or test site. So you'll be able to actually build your forms, build your workflows, and simply click on export, take the file, take it to production, and import and publish it. And it should be pretty easy to do. Some of these I'm going to leave, they're pretty obvious: copy, cut, paste, select all, and even the format painter. That's if you want to copy some of the settings, like if you go and set some background colors and things like that and borders, you can do this format painter, which will have all the controls inherent from that first control. So we've talked about create column, right? It's pretty obvious. Let's skip over the settings and live settings. Form variables are variables you can actually create that get data into them at the very beginning of the form. So when they get instantiated, when the form gets instantiated, those form variables will get data in them. And then you can use those throughout this form, usually in things like rules, etc. The other important thing to note are these things here. These are different layouts. The different layout we have is desktop. So this will look pretty nice on a desktop browser like IE, Chrome, Firefox, etc. But if you want this to look better on an iPhone, for example, or a Windows phone or Android phone, if you just enable the smartphone layout, it will rearrange these controls and make it a little bit easier for you. It's a good starting off point, and then you can move things around and make things a little bit easier and better to see. There are some other layouts if you want to do, for example, something specific for an iPhone or an Android, etc. But really, the smartphone pretty much covers all those devices, so you can just do it once. Nintex mobile phone, Nintex mobile tablet are layout specifically for the Nintex mobile app, and I'll go into that in another session. But the Nintex mobile app just gives you that ability to fill in your forms from an app on your mobile device rather than from the browser. And there's a few more pretty cool things about that, but like I said, I'll go into that in another session. Now notice there's actually an option here for workflow settings where you can create workflow, manage workflow, etc. There is a nice integration with Nintex Forms and Nintex Workflow. So one example, or in this example, we're actually building a form for a SharePoint list, but you could also potentially build a form for a particular workflow task, right? And that gives you the ability to actually use workflow variables in your form, setting some default values, using them in rules, etc. Really powerful. Now, the final thing, actually not the final thing, but the almost final thing is the rules section. So we have a rules engine in Nintex Forms, and this is a way for you to be able to build rules in your form to hide, show, enable, disable different parts of this form based on certain conditions. So you see I'm going to select these three controls, click on add, and you can see I can give it a rule name, like we'll just call it a hello rule. You have the option to do formatting and validation. So we now have two places we can do validation, right here in the rules or in the actual items or controls themselves. Building a condition, simply click on this button over here and you can start building out your condition. You might say, let's actually get rid of that. Let's go into runtime functions and we'll use a runtime function called contains. And then we'll say, if the title control contains the word, let's do it in single quotes here, contains the word hello, I want to hide the selected controls. So really easy to do these sorts of rules, and you can build them as complex as you want. Okay, now let's go into a couple of other things. Settings, this is where you configure the settings for the form. It's also where you do some really cool things like add custom CSS and JavaScript. And if you expand the CSS one, you'll notice there's already a whole bunch in there. That's what comes with the template. So of course you can always get rid of this as well. You can also put custom JavaScript in here. And then finally, if you don't want to embed it directly into this form design and you want to centralize it a little bit, just click on the advanced section and you'll be able to add CSS includes and JavaScript includes as well. Finally, down here, you'll see there's some Nintex mobile settings. So this is where you set up once you've built your form and it has Nintex mobile layouts. Maybe you want to put it in a particular category. And again, I'll go into a little bit more detail of this in another session. And we'll leave the print to PDF for now. Okay, final one here is the live settings. Now we talked about Nintex Live in regards to Nintex Workflow, and it gives us a whole bunch of workflow actions. Nintex Live for Forms actually allows you to publish this form outside of your farm to somewhere else. So in this case, you simply click on Publish Nintex Live. We'll just do the Allow Anonymous, and we can set an expiration date to, let's say, the 15th. Click on Save. Click on Publish, and when you publish this form, it will go out, talk to the Nintex Live environment, publish this form out to there, and it will give you a short URL which you'll then be able to do some cool stuff with. You'll be able to send it to somebody or embed it in some web page. Again, we'll do an example of that in a future session. So this pretty much covers all that. It's being a little bit slow because it's my VM, but this pretty much covers all the basics of Nintex Forms on-prem. There you go, there's the little short URL that you can actually access. I'm going to just go into the Office 365 environment. It looks very similar. There's an Nintex Forms button for my list. There is no drop down at the moment, but potentially we'll add one later on. Simply click on that and that will bring up the form designer and you'll get something like this. And notice how it looks very similar. Similar how it's got like a template that it has built a form for us, but it's a little different. In Office 365, we actually have something called a base form, which is for a site. So instead of having a template for the entire tenant, like we have on-prem, we have a template for the entire farm. This is actually for the site. So you could have an HR specific template and a fire specific template, etc. Still have all these controls on the left. There's a few differences, but for the most part, all the ones that you probably need to use are all in here. Under SharePoint, it is right now it has a list lookup control, so you can do all your queries and things like that. Adding more and more controls to this as we move along. We still have the publish, we still have the preview, we still have the import export, and we have the form settings, and we have a rules engine. Right, what we don't have in the Office 365 is the ability to publish this form to Nintex Live. So just a few little subtle differences from the on-prem to the Office 365 environment. But other than that, they're pretty much the same product. So your learning curve going from an on-prem, if you're currently using that, or you use it for a little while, and you're planning on moving to Office 365, your learning curve is going to be pretty small, pretty short, because it's pretty much the same product. Okay, that covers pretty much all the basics that I want to cover around Nintex Forms on-prem and Office 365. Feel free to add any comments, whether they're on the YouTube channel or on my personal blog. Whatever comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks for your time and look forward to June Gem number 4 coming in a few days.